This is chapter 1.1. This chapter is called Points, Lines, and Planes. And our goal for this lesson is for us to be able to say that I can identify and model points, lines, and planes. Before we actually get into our lesson, I do want to kind of define for us what geometry is. Because if we just jump into this magical thing of geometry, we may not know what are we actually studying, or what was geometry whenever it first was conceived. Well, geometry is made up of two words. It's actually made up of two Greek words. Geo, which means earth. Then metry, which means measurement. So in other words, geometry is a study of the measurements of the earth. Does that make sense? It's a study of the measurements of the earth. So in other words, we are looking at the objects in the earth. We are studying them to be able to see if there's mathematical properties in them. So that is kind of what geometry is. It is a mathematical idea that deals with shapes. It deals with positions and the properties of spaces. And at the very base of geometry, we have what's called undefined terms. Okay? Undefined terms are terms that we can't define, right? Hence why it's called an undefined term. It cannot be defined. Instead, what we use for these undefined terms, these are terms that are so obvious that we should know what they are. Okay? Example is a point, lines, and planes. You guys all know what a point is. You guys all know what a line is. You guys are going to find out what a plane is based off of a picture that is drawn. We can't really describe it. It's more of a visual representation that we are going to have for it. So undefined terms are terms or ideas that we use pictures or they're so easy to be able to see that they don't need an explanation. Okay, so basically these are ideas so foundational that we are not going to, we don't have to explain what they are. So an undefined term is a point. Okay, a point is a single dot. Okay, it's a dot. It has, it is a location. It is somewhere. Okay, it is a point is a location. It has neither size nor shape. We typically draw it as a round circle. That's just the easiest explanation of it. It is a certain location on some spot of a map, somewhere in a graph. It is a location, okay? And how we can do this, let's say we have several of these points. Let's put several points on this sheet of paper here, okay? Well, these are just random points. How can we talk about these points? Well, in order to talk about these points, they have to have names. Well, easiest names is just use the letters of the alphabet. So what we do, we say, okay, well, this can be point A, this can be point B, this can be point C, this can be point D, right? We name them. So in order for us to be able to talk about them, it has to have a name. It needs to have a destination. Similar to if you were to go to a store. If you wanted to go to that specific store, it's helpful to know what is the name of the store so that I can know where I am actually going. It's helpful to know what city that store is in. It's even helpful to know what's the address of that store so that we know where is it located at. Does that make sense? Okay, so the dimensions of a point is 0 dimensions. Okay, it has no dimensions. Remember, it's not a shape. It's just a spot, a location. Okay, how we write it or how we talk about it. If we were to see just a point on a page, okay, we just say, okay, well, this is point A, or we can say point B, or we can say point C, or we can say point D. So we are listing out what the point is and where it's located. A line. A line is similar to a point. In fact, a line is made up of an infinite amount of points. Okay? A line is made up of points that have no thickness or width, and there is exactly one line that can go through any 2 points. Okay, so if we have 2 points, let's say we have a point here and here. This line and exactly that only line can go through those 2 points. Let's call this point A, and let's call this point B. Remember, a line is made up of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of points. All the way through is a point after a point after point after point, so close together that it creates this illusion of a line. And it goes on forever in either directions. Right? Remember, this is undefined. We don't necessarily have a way of defining it. It's easiest to be able to see it as a picture. And it's so simple that we don't really need a definition, right? You can just see it. It's easier to visualize it. Well, how many dimensions does a line have? A line is actually one-dimensional. One-dimensional. It's just this way or this way, one-dimensional. How do you write about a line? Well, we can either name it like this. We can say line AB, or there's a shorthand of writing this. We could say, you notice that this line has 2 arrows on the ends, right? It has 2 arrows. So what we are going to do is we are going to put AB and put arrows over top of that. That's another way of talking about the line. Remember, we are using symbols to represent that picture. And we're trying to do it in a concise way to make it easier for us to be able to just recognize it right off the spot. Also, there's another way of recognizing a line. Instead of saying 2 points on a line, we could indicate it with just one letter. Typically, we use a lowercase letter. We could use like a L. We typically use like a fancy little L like that. Or we might use an M like that. Either ways work. Let's just call this line M. Okay, so we could talk about this by saying line M. Instead of having 2 points that we have on there, we know there's an infinite amount. We could pick out any 2 points if we really wanted to. If we just say this is line M, we're good. If we say this is line AB, we're good. If we say with this symbol, this is technically saying line AB. Okay, so that is line AB. A plane. I'm going to draw a picture of the plane. Typically, we draw it we draw it kind of like a piece of paper. Okay, we kind of draw like a piece of paper. A paper could be a representation of a plane. It's a visual representation. It's flat. A plane is two-dimensional. A plane is a flat surface made up of points that extends infinitely in all directions. There is exactly one plane through any 3 points not on the same line. Okay, so if we have 3 points, let's say we have this point here, and this point here, and they're all in this same plane. Let's call this A, B, and C, right? We want to be able to locate where these points are. This is point A. We want to be able to talk about it. Point B, point C. These 3 points are not on the same line, right? They're not on the same line. But they are all on this plane. Okay? So how we talk about a plane is we say, okay, well, we can say, just spell it out, plane A, B, C. Notice with point, we only had to do one letter, right? We only had to do one letter, point A, B, C, or D. With a line, we typically had to do 2 letters. Or we can have just talking about the line with just 1 letter there, okay? But that is different than just the points. But with the plane, we have to use 3 letters. Notice dimensions is 1 less than the number of letters you have. Okay, so that's just something interesting. We also could talk about the plane using 1 letter. Typically, whenever we talk about a plane, we reserve P or we use K. We don't put a point beside it because we want to be able to say this is for the plane, not a point. Okay, so if we put P over there, we don't want to put a dot beside it. If we put K over here, we don't want to put a dot beside it. So we could also say that this is plane P. That's another way we could talk about this plane. Also, by the way, we don't have to say plane ABC. We could do a different order. We could do plane CBA or plane BAC. Order does not matter in the way we pick our points. I just chose ABC because that's alphabetical orders. Okay, that's the way it's in order in the alphabet. So that's the reason why I chose ABC. So that is just our undefined terms, point, line, plane. Easiest way to be able to describe these is by showing a picture. And they are so simple of an idea that we are not going to try to really explain what they are. Questions. Here's a question. What are definitions? We have our undefined terms, and now we have this idea of a defined term. A definition is really just a term that has been defined. Okay, so that we have some sort of definition. Well, a definition is really just an explanation. It's a very precise explanation. It explains it using our undefined terms. So if we wanted to talk about other things, we can use a point to describe something else. We can use a line to describe something else. We can use a plane to define something else. It is a way of conveying information in a clear and concise way. Okay, so that is kind of what definitions are. It's an idea, it's a way of explaining what these terms mean. That is what a definition is. We are going to define a few things. Let's define what it means to be collinear, non-collinear, coplanar, and non-coplanar. Okay, collinear. Let's break that word apart a little bit. Linear. What does linear mean? Well, linear means a straight line, right? Linear means to be on a straight line. Collinear means that we have points that are all on this line. Okay, so we are going to say collinear points. We're specifically talking about points. Are points that lie on the same line. I'll give an example of this in a moment. Let's get to non-collinear. So if collinear means that these are points that are on the same line, non-collinear would mean that these are points that are not on the same line. Okay, so non-collinear, we're going to say points are points that don't lie on the same line. Let me give you a few examples of this. So if we have, let's say we have 3 points. Typically when we talk about collinear and non-collinear, it's typically talking about 3 or more points. So these 3 points that I just drew on here, these are collinear because we could draw a straight line that goes through all 3. That's collinear. Non-collinear would be something along this lines. We have a point here, let's put a point over here, and let's put a point here. Notice there's not a way that we can draw a straight line through all 3 points and have them all be on the same line. So non-collinear would be, well, we had to decide which 2 points we want to send it through. We can send it through these 2 points down here. The third one's not on the same line. Or we can send it through these 2 points up here. Notice the third point is not on the same line. Those points down here are non-collinear. The points up there are. Remember, collinear, they lie on the same line. Non-collinear, they do not. Remember, in order for us to have collinear or non-collinear, we must have at least 3 points. Remember I said a little bit ago that a line can be created with any 2 points. As long as we have 2 points, we have a line that goes through those 2. If we add a third one, then we get our linear and collinear. Our collinear and non-collinear in there. Okay, let's talk about coplanar. And we're going to specifically talk about points. Coplanar points. These are points that lie in the same plane. Go figure, right? Collinear, they lie on the same line. Non-collinear, they don't. Coplanar, they lie in the same plane. Non-coplanar means that they are points that do not lie in the same plane. So these are points that do not lie in the same plane. Remember what I said earlier, that a plane is typically defined by 3 points, right? Any 3 points, we have a plane. So we must have at least 4 points for us to be able to talk about whether it is coplanar or not. So let me give you a few examples of this. Let's draw out our plane like a sheet of paper. Let's put some points in here. We have this point, this point, this point, and let's put this point in there. All 4 of these points are within this plane. That's coplanar. Let's say we have another example of non-coplanar. Let's say we have a point here, a point here, a point here. These 3 points are all in the same plane. And let's say we have a point out there. That's not in the same plane as these 3 points. These are not coplanar. So those are examples of that. Let's actually get into some examples. We're in example 1. This is actually similar to example 1 in the textbook. So this is kind of the way that we're following along. We're kind of following the textbook along. Of course, I'm going to use different problems than the textbook uses, because the textbook has their own explanations. I'll give you my explanation as well. So we are using or use a figure to name each of the following. A line containing point E. There's actually a lot of lines that contain point E. We have this is a line here, isn't it? And E is on that line. So we could say this is, let's use our symbols instead. Let's put the arrows on top. Line EF, or you can say FE, either or. Order does not matter. We can put the F first or the E first. It does not matter. We could also say, wait, this line here is considered line M. This line right here is considered line M. So we could also say line M. That contains letter E. But wait, we have this other line. We have line N that also contains E, right? So we could say line N. But line N is also the same thing as saying line BD. So we could say, with the arrows on top, BD. We could also say BE. We could also say DE or ED. That works as well. These are all good options for this. By the way, there are other options. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to give you just one more option. Any 2 points make a line, right? Any 2 points make a line. So we could also do point C with E. That could create a new line that would go through point E. It doesn't have to be a line that's currently exists. As long as we have 2 points, we have a line. We can create a line with any 2 points. We could also choose A and E. By the way, it doesn't say how many we had to do, so I'm just going to stop there. Whenever it comes to the homework, I would like you guys to list off at least 2. And if you can do more, then that would be great as well. A plane. Remember, whenever we were listing off or naming a plane, we had to have at least 3 points, right? At least 3 points. Notice, B, D, E, F, C are all within this plane. A is outside that plane, right? But we can create a plane using any 3 points. A plane can be made using any 3 points. So a plane containing line N. This is line N right here. Any 3 points. All we need is just 2 points that are on that line. That's line N. Remember, line N, we can say BD, or we can say BE, or we can say DE. That's all line N. So if we wanted to say a plane, we can say, well, we can have plane. Let's say B, D, C. That's a plane that is also including this line, right? As long as we have the points that are on the line, 2 of them, then we include it. We could also say plane, let's say A, BD. By the way, you could do DBA if you really wanted to. Order does not matter in this case whenever you're naming a plane. Line N is also on the plane P, right? It's also on the plane P. So we could say, well, this is plane P. Remember, when we list out a plane, if there's not a point beside it, that's talking about the plane. So that is some examples of that. Let's go to example 2. Name the geometric terms modeled by the objects. By the way, this is our last thing we are going to do in this lesson for now. Tomorrow we are going to pick up where we left off, and we are going to finish up this chapter. So it's a short lesson today. Name the geometric terms modeled by the objects. A piece of paper. That would be modeling a plane, right? Like I mentioned earlier, a piece of paper really does not have a third dimension. It's two-dimensional. It's just goes out in length and width. It has no height. So a piece of paper would be an example of a plane. Easy enough. An edge of a table. So we have tables here. If you look on the edge, what do you think that would be? If we just have this edge of this, that would be a line. So that would be a line right here. And if we wanted a tip of a pin, that would be a point. So the last example wants us to be able to look through and be able to name points, lines, or planes based off of objects that we see around us. The first example wants us to be able to list off, at least name the lines. It wants us to be able to name the planes that we see. And we also went through what it means to be collinear, what it means to be non-collinear, what it means to be coplanar and non-coplanar. We talked about definitions, what definitions are. We talked about undefined terms, the points, lines, and planes. We call them undefined terms because they are something so simple that we don't really need to explain what they are. And they're easy to see with pictures. And we also mentioned what geometry was. So by the end of this lesson, I hope that we can identify and model points, lines, and planes.